News that Sir Francis Drake Primary School will be changing its name to Twin Oaks Primary School. I mean, it makes you proud to be British, doesn't it? Nothing makes you think of Great Britain than Twin Oaks. This comes after a poll was conducted with 88% of 450 parents, staff, pupils and local residents voting in favour of a new name. You know, this was actually an episode of Waterloo Road. You know the series Waterloo Road? They did this on Waterloo Road. It's not a sitcom, it's not a drama, no, this is real life. The wokies have gone absolutely mental. The poll was prompted after BLM protesters called into question Drake's connection to the slave trade. Now, let's just have a few things right about Drake, OK? Drake is primarily remembered for, and crucially here, defeating the Spanish Armada's invasion of England in 1588. But he drifted into piracy and did own slaves. Head teacher of the school, Karen Cartwright, had this to say: the slave trade links associated with the current name sat at odds with the values of our school. Can I just say, one would assume, just because the school is called Sir Francis Drake School, I don't think anyone thinks that the values of that school would imply that it supports slavery. I mean, that would be weird, wouldn't it? This story caused outrage on Twitter, with many prominent historians and figures calling this choice a lack of historical knowledge and context. In fact, the BBC are copying it a bit on the show so far, aren't they? The BBC reported this story on their Twitter, renaming Drake, basically just saying slave trader Sir Francis Drake. So that's it. So Sir Francis Drake is just now the slave trader. Not the guy who literally saved England from the Spanish. No, not at all. Historian Professor Robert Toombs told Mail Online, naming a school after him does not mean being in favour of slavery. That would be absurd. Drake is remembered for helping to save England from a terrible invasion. Rather than using his name to teach his pupils valuable lessons about the past, they've opted for a bland and meaningless alternative that cuts it off from history. Tory MP Alexander Stafford called this cultural vandalism. So, does this just define Drake now? Do none of his other achievements matter? Do we just know George Orwell as some kind of homophobe? Or remember Churchill as just, I don't know, a rampant alcoholic? Here to discuss this eroding of history is the journalist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn, who's weighed in on this debate on Twitter. Patrick, thank you very much. I'll throw it over to you. I mean, it makes you proud to be British, doesn't it? I can't wait for my kids to go to Twin Oaks School.
Yeah, well, when I was of primary school age, most boys that I knew got their basics from history, not just from the primary school, but from this series here. I'm holding up a ladybird history, if the viewers can see it, if I can get it out. Anyway, this one's on Elizabeth I, and it includes several screeds about Francis Drake. In fact, I'll read you the first
I'm enjoying this. It's like an actual history.
The reign of Elizabeth was a time for adventurous deeds at sea. Of all the men who sailed from our shores into unknown seas, the greatest was Sir Francis Drake, right? Now, I think our primary school pupils should be learning a bit of that, and the school should get the ladybird histories back in. But what I'm particularly worried about is this apparently was some kind of quasi-democratic decision. The critical weight of opinion at this school in Deptford in southeast London among the parents, the pupils, the staff, of course, you know, left-wing teachers in inner London, was to drop the name of one of our great heroes. And my particular point is that this is an authentic reflection of what's happening in London and with the London population now. And part of it's huge demographic change, mass immigration without any integration, no pride in our national story. And I blame cultural and social conservatives, dare I say it, probably like us, and particularly the Conservative Party in power for the last decade and more, for not taking the fight on this.
For being too scared,
restore a sense of national pride.
Yeah, I am begrudgingly inclined to agree with you. I do like to think that I try to do my bit to stop that happening every now and again, but I can see it happening left, right and centre. I mean, there was a school in Pimlico where the Union Jack was set on fire in the school by pupils, and that was just all right. In fact, I think probably the head teacher ended up apologising and replacing the Union Jack, which is where we're at now, isn't it? And I just can't help but feel as though this is pointing to something much wider, which you've alluded to, Patrick, which is the total erosion of British history, and the only elements of it that are being highlighted as well are the negative ones. I mean, what have you got to do to have a school named after you? Saving this country from the Spanish apparently is not one of them.
No, absolutely. And mark my words, if we don't, or if the Conservative Party in government doesn't take up this battle, turn the tide on this critical race theory, start teaching young people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds the pride and the great achievements of this country, Londoners, these young Londoners, will be coming for Nelson's column within 10 years' time.
Oh, Churchill will be toppled. Churchill will be toppled 100%. Yeah. And I mean, there is also another irony to this, of course, which is about the Barbary slaves. I mean, there were loads of people who were basically white Europeans who were sold into slavery as well. I mean, where are our reparations? We never hear about that.
No, absolutely. And as someone of Irish Catholic heritage, you know, if I was to obsess about the past, I would call for every statue of Oliver Cromwell to be ripped down. But the whole point is that I was brought up focusing on the country I belong to, which is England and the United Kingdom and the great achievements. We seem to be drumming it into kids from ethnic minority backgrounds these days to be resentful about the society they're growing up in, instead of to identify with it and get to a post-racial politics. And as you were alluding to earlier, the story of slavery is very, very much more complex than just the idea of white Europeans oppressing black people.
100%. But there is also another element to it, which is if you watched any adverts at the moment on British television, or you walked into various different institutions and you saw the amount of virtue signalling going on, you would be forgiven for thinking that every other person that you walked past in the street was a member of the LGBTQ plus community, you know, trans or whatever. You would be forgiven for thinking that the vast majority of people in this country were not, in fact, ethnic minorities. They were now the ethnic majorities. You would be forgiven for thinking that if you just turned your TV on and saw the adverts. Why on earth are we, do you think, not proud about our own culture, enforcing our own culture? Instead, we're so apologetic about it.
Well, I think it's very much to do with London being so predominant in the UK, the centre of finance, politics, media, you know, 7 or 8 times as big as the next big city, the centre, you know, the volume and the voice of London, you know, and an enormous hotbed for immigration. So, you know, most people working in London, growing up in London, were not born in London, were not even born in England, you know, so it's a completely different place. And yet the people working in media, particularly in the BBC in London, think the whole country is like London. And that's why you get this over predominance of tiny minorities. It's
the creation of this completely fake narrative, like I've said there, about the demographics of this country, whether that's in an ethnic sense or whether it's in a sexual orientation sense. At the same time, so simultaneously, the total desecration of our actual history and a relentless desire to focus only on the negatives, which absolutely makes my mind boggle. Patrick, thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Patrick O'Flynn there, former Brexit Party MEP, political commentator as